Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed News Corner, coming to you today on a Saturday, a day later than usual, but that was to fit in Steve's review of the GeForce GTX 1650 Super. If you missed it, go back and check it out because it's a surprisingly good product despite Nvidia's lack of advertising and a few issues with the launch day driver, offering very good value up against the long-standing $150 GPU champions in AMD's RX 580 and RX 570. Also had a few questions on my last video about these happy unboxing t-shirts, or in this case, I guess it's actually a sweater. These are limited edition holiday items that you can get right now from the Hardware Unboxed store. Links in the description below. We're super excited about them. I think they look great. You see some of these little PC components around the design and all that sort of thing. And of course, every purchase you make through the store directly helps us out with buying the hardware that you see reviewed on the channel every week. So yeah, check that out. Hardware Unboxed store, links in the description. Now on with the news. The first story this week concerns another GPU, but perhaps not an official graphics card launch. I'm of course talking about the Radeon RX 5500 series, which, let's be honest, has been a bit of an unconventional launch so far. AMD first announced this product a few weeks back, but focused on the OEM and mobile markets. In fact, there really wasn't any information about RX 5500 GPUs from board partners that you can buy in a retail store. So the launch was mostly to allow OEMs making both pre-built desktops and laptops to announce and release their RX 5500 products before the all-important holiday period. AMD didn't really say much about the board partner cards at the time. Basically, these were to be released shortly as well, just a bit after the OEM products. This left the launch in an unusual position where OEM RX 5500 products were being released onto the market before add-in cards. Usually it's the other way around. So this means that anyone who wants to know how the RX 5500 performs has had to go out and find a desktop with an RX 5500 in it, then purchase it, take out the card, put it in a proper test system and get going. Unfortunately, as far as we're aware, there aren't any RX 5500 systems on sale in Australia just yet, so we haven't been able to benchmark the card. But the guys over at Heise.de, a German publication we've talked about in the past, have been able to source an RX 5500 system from HP, a Pavilion model with their classic letters and numbers super product name. HP mistakenly lists the GPU as a Radeon RX 5300 XT, but the actual GPU Heise received in their HP system was the RX 5500. It came in a reference design with 4GB of GDDR6, requiring a single 8-pin power connector and packing 3 display outputs. Nothing crazy, it's a short OEM card with a single fan. Of course, board partner add-in cards will be a bit more fancy than this. Heise has also provided a few benchmark comparisons between their RX 5500 OEM card and factory overclocked versions of the RX 580 and GTX 1660. In all tests, the RX 5500 OEM card trails the RX 580 slightly while falling further behind the GTX 1660. It does consume a lot less power than the RX 580, but not as little as the GTX 1660 for lower performance as well. Heise didn't go into any discussion on clock speeds, so we don't know how well this OEM version is stacking up against AMD's rated clocks for the RX 5500 series. We know the card is supposed to run at a game clock up to 1717 MHz, but OEM products can be a bit funky. It also only has 4GB of GDDR6 memory as opposed to the full 8GB that AMD claims will be available with some units. In general though, the brief performance summary from Heise seems to show the RX 5500 performing about as expected. AMD in their official unveiling claimed performance would be 12% better than the RX 480, so naturally that gap will drop to almost nothing when you're comparing it to a factory overclocked RX 580 instead. However, this is just an OEM card. We really don't know how this will translate to add-in cards. If anything, a decent add-in card, perhaps with the factory overclock, should be a bit faster. It's also impossible to draw any conclusions here without knowing the RX 5500's price. I suspect this will be a $150 graphics card going on the performance shown here and by AMD, and it would certainly not want to be much more expensive given the latest launch of the GTX 1650 Super, which offers RX 580 performance as well for about $160. We don't have any firm word on when board partner models will be available for you to buy. We'll have a full benchmark review up the second we can, but it sounds like it's still a few weeks away. Until then, then Nvidia will have a few weeks in a good position with the GTX 1650 Super. This next story also concerns AMD, and it's a bit of a weird one. There seems to have been a lot of discussion around the place about the best or fastest core in AMD's latest Ryzen 3000 processors and how Windows is handling these cores. It's a complex topic, but I guess I'll try my best to summarize it here. Basically, all Ryzen CPUs have a firmware level ranking of the CPU cores, which is determined when the chip is assembled and dictates which cores are preferred for lightly threaded workloads. Windows reads this firmware level ranking, you've probably heard that as CPPC2, and uses this to allocate workloads. Ryzen Master also is supposed to tell you which are the faster/preferred cores and allocates either a star or a dot to those cores in the app depending on how highly ranked they are. An issue here has cropped up when enthusiast users have discovered that Windows is using a different preferred core on their CPU compared to what Ryzen Master claims. This has led to concerns that Windows isn't properly reading the preferred core rankings and is using a slower core for single or lightly threaded workloads, leading to lower boost clocks and lower performance. However, AMD has clarified this week that actually this isn't the case. Instead, Windows and Ryzen Master are actually using the ranking data for different purposes, and in fact, Windows is performing as expected. Here's a simplification of what is going on. Windows reads the ranking table and picks the fastest pair of cores that reside within a CCX. You can think of this as Windows checking each CCX, finding which CCX has the fastest core pair, and using that pair for single thread workloads. This allows Windows to balance single thread workloads over two cores, as you often see happening, which is optimal for performance. Ryzen Master is showing you the absolute fastest single core in the entire processor for overclocking potential, and it's giving that a gold star. This may not be the best core for boost purposes. Instead, it's the core with the optimal voltage frequency curve for overclocking. The discrepancy is coming when the single fastest core in the entire CPU is in a CCX that doesn't have a very good second core. Windows needs a strong pairing of cores, and Ryzen actually might perform worse if it instead picked the absolute fastest core to use if that core has a slower partner to bounce the workload with. So it picks the best pair. But if you want to overclock to the max, Ryzen Master is showing you which cores are the outright best so you can tune them appropriately. It's a bit of a non-issue overall as Windows is performing as expected and Ryzen Master is kind of just showing people something different to what Windows is picking. But at the end of the day, AMD has chosen to modify Ryzen Master in an upcoming version to align with how Windows is picking and using Ryzen 3000 cores for boost workloads. If you want a more detailed explanation and you've been following this whole preferred core situation, check the source link in the description where AMD provides much more on this topic. In a surprise move, Intel has publicly apologized to its partners and customers over ongoing CPU shipment delays. Intel's supply issues have been well documented at this point, and the letter this week talks about their struggles in this department while apologizing to businesses who have been affected by the issue. The crux of the letter is as follows. Intel hasn't been able to resolve their supply issues yet. Supply remains tight while demand is continuing to increase, which has created a strain on both Intel and of course customers who rely on these chips. Intel are investing a ton of money into increasing 14nm production and ramping up 10nm as well, but to this point it still hasn't been enough. Crucially, the lack of supply means that Intel haven't been able to keep strong inventory buffers. This means that Intel haven't been able to absorb the impact of production variability, and indeed this quarter Intel ran into a bit of a production variability problem, which has caused a new set of shipment delays. Unfortunately for customers, there's no information in this letter as to when the shipment and supply problems will be resolved. It's just a vague sort of letter with Intel saying representatives are reaching out with additional information. In some ways, having super strong demand for Intel products is a good thing for their business. At the same time, being unable to supply enough chips to meet demand over such a long period isn't good for their customers and is definitely having an impact. No doubt Intel's struggles with 10nm have contributed to this problem. They would have been hoping to have many more 10nm products in the manufacturing stage at this point, but without being able to ramp it up until recently, it's put a huge strain on 14nm and Intel's ballooning portfolio of products that they offer on that node. The letter also seems to indicate that supply issues will be ongoing for at least the foreseeable future, as they don't really say when it's going to be resolved, which I guess will make rivals like AMD quite happy. they're cranking out 7nm CPUs like no tomorrow at the moment. Got quite a few quicker topics here to breeze through. Let's start with some Fortnite news. Not something I normally cover here, although Steve is a bit of a Fortnite fan, so maybe he'll be happy. Anyway, the news here is that Epic Games have added a DirectX 12 mode to Fortnite in the latest version. Epic says that by using DX12, PC players with high-end GPUs may experience a higher and steadier frame rate. This is because DX12 delivers better CPU performance and allows for the distribution of rendering jobs across multiple cores. We haven't done any extensive benchmarking yet, but from what we're hearing from people playing the game, the DX12 mode is indeed quite good, especially on AMD hardware with the latest drivers, where there is a decent performance uplift. Probably worth checking out if you play a lot of Fortnite. Couple of interesting GPU stories now. First up is some very early news of Intel's Xe GPU for HPC, which is codenamed Ponte Vecchio. This accelerator won't be available until 2021, but at this week's SC19 event, Intel did give a bit more information on how they're designing Ponte Vecchio. Basically, Intel's Xe architecture will be optimized and modified slightly for different product segments. Intel didn't go into details on exactly how this would happen, but I'd be expecting stuff like high double precision performance and AI units on the enterprise and data center products that may not be there for gaming and integrated graphics as an example. Ponte Vecchio specifically will be built on Intel's upcoming 7nm process and will use a chiplet design with Foveros die stacking technology. The chiplets will be joined together using Intel's embedded multi-die interconnect bridge or EMIB, and then GPU to GPU communication will be through a CXL interface on PCIe 5.0. Not much other info is given, so no word on your compute units, your memory capabilities, power targets, and so on. It's also unclear how much of this will translate over to Intel's consumer-focused Xe products like gaming cards. Will there be 7nm or 10nm? Will they use a chiplet design? Who knows? But as we get closer and closer to Xe's launch, we can expect a ton more information there. AMD has also made an announcement in the GPU space with their new workstation card, the Radeon Pro W5700. This is essentially a workstation version of the Radeon RX 5700, the non-XT model, featuring 36 RDNA compute units, a boost clock of 1930 MHz, and 8GB of GDDR6 memory at 14 gigabits per second. The boost clock is a bit higher than AMD lists for the RX 5700, giving the W5700 a higher 205 watt TDP and single precision compute performance much closer to the RX 5700 XT. The launch price for the W700 is $800, so as expected this is a more expensive Navi variant, but along with that price tag comes all the benefits of a workstation card like certified drivers for professional and productivity applications. At this point it seems AMD are offering a fair bit more performance than their previous parts to at the same price, which is always nice to see. According to Notebook Check, Nvidia are planning to bring their refreshed lineup of super GPUs to notebooks in 2020. The GPUs themselves are pictured on a slide photographed by a Notebook Check source and are expected to bring minor improvements in line with what Nvidia has done on the desktop side, so slight increases to CUDA cores and clock speeds. The RTX 2060 for laptops also appears to be getting a power increase, which will help bring it much closer to the RTX 2060 desktop version. Notebook Check say the super lineup will launch in March 2020, which I expect will be a big refresh period for laptops. Intel will likely push out 10th generation H series processors around that time as well, so we'll get a double refresh of GPUs and CPUs for laptops. And that'll do it for this week's News Corner. I definitely recommend subscribing to Hardware Unboxed if you haven't already, because there are some big releases coming out next week that you may want to check out. Consider supporting us on Patreon if you like what we do, or grabbing some merch like this new holiday sweater and t-shirt. Links to that are in the description below. That's all. I'll catch you in the next one.